My name is Sensei John Border, and welcome to Single Step Productions DVD Dynamic Finger Locks. I have approximately 20 years of experience in martial arts. I hold a 5th degree black belt in modern jiu-jitsu, as well as black belts in small circle jiu-jitsu, taekwondo, hapkido, combat hapkido, and kyusho jitsu. While finger locks may be inherent in a number of martial arts systems, primarily where this comes from my background is small circle jiu-jitsu. Professor Wally Jay, the founder and grandmaster of small circle jiu-jitsu, really turned finger locking into a recognized system, a recognized art, and a very, very efficient and effective martial arts and self-defense technique. So most of my experience and most of my background in finger locking techniques I do owe to Professor Wally Jay and the current grandmaster of small circle jiu-jitsu, Professor Leon Jay. One of the primary purposes of this DVD and of Single Step Productions DVDs in general is to share techniques, share applications, share principles to allow you as a martial artist or a self-defense instructor or even someone just trying to learn self-defense to integrate these techniques into your own system, your own program, and your own way of doing things. Finger locks are, by definition, manipulating the small joints in the fingers and the hands for very effective and very efficient joint locking techniques. I've been fortunate enough to teach these techniques to military personnel, police personnel, and civilian self-defense classes. They're great for men, women, students. It really doesn't rely on size and strength. It relies on principle and application, and really that's going to be the focus of this particular DVD. This DVD is not going to be designed to teach you 100 different finger locks, in all different varieties. What we're going to really focus on is how to do finger locks. We're going to work on 4 or 5 very basic functional techniques and really have the focus be on making them the most effective and the most efficient that we can. This DVD is going to cover some of the basic applications of finger locking, including fulcrum, lever, base, wrist extension, taking away space, and transition. We're also going to take a look at some of the more advanced principles and concepts of finger locking, including the palm theory, reciprocity, spinal alignment, spiraling, multiple axes, and vibration. Before I start getting into the principles and the techniques of finger locks, I want to demonstrate some very basic but very important exercises. They can be considered warm-up exercises, but really what it's designed to do is illustrate a very, very important motion that we're going to utilize during finger locks that's critical to the effectiveness of the technique. These exercises are primarily wrist extension exercises. You're gonna notice as we get into this DVD and we discuss technique, there's an awful lot of independent wrist action, and that's very, very important. One of the principles about finger locks or any type of joint locking really is a matter of making the movement as efficient and as effective as possible. In other words, you're going to see that these joint locks have very, very small motion. What these exercises are designed to do is get you into that muscle memory and into that mindset of very, very small motions in order to make these finger locks effective. These wrist exercises work this way. If you take your hand and you just kind of hold it out this way, all right, what you want to do is you want to extend your wrist. You actually want to have that connection here bend this way, not just straightening the wrist this way. You really have to have a lot of wrist extension, which is what the nature of these exercises are. So what you do is you're going to take that pinky and cut it back and almost try to touch your own wrist. So you're going to do this action here. And what you can do is you can use both hands, okay, this way. And this is just a regular vertical wrist extension. You can alternate back and forth. Again, the semantics of the exercises really isn't what's important. The importance is trying to get this range of motion and that particular wrist extension. There's a number of these that we'll do, and it'll just take a couple of minutes to kind of get us going. Wrist extension exercises and a vertical wrist extension. What you do is you cut back, you extend, and you press forward. Again, the purpose of this is for that independent wrist action. Another variation of that is going to be an inside wrist twist or wrist extension. Same type of motion. You're going to take your hand, you're going to cut it inside this way, almost like you're turning a doorknob. And again, the purpose is to get that wrist working on its own, loosen those up, develop that level of sensitivity. Along those same lines, we're going to switch in the other direction now. We're going to go to an outside wrist twist. Keep your wrist very loose, very flexible. It's going to be very important as we start talking about the principles and the applications of finger locking. Very good. And the last one is just a horizontal wrist extension, where this would be the vertical wrist extension with my hand in this position. Horizontal would just be doing this. And again, focus on wrist extension, wrist flexibility, and relaxation. In our classes, we start every warm-up and every training session with those particular warm-ups. It's critical to doing effective locking, especially effective finger locking, so take those back and use those for what you can. I'd like to introduce my student in black belt, Mr. Paul Munn. Paul was gracious enough to offer his time and efforts to help us illustrate and demonstrate some of these techniques. Paul? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
First of all, I want to take a little bit of time to talk about some of the very basic fundamentals of the actual finger locking techniques. Right? One of the very first basic fundamentals of finger locking techniques is going to be hand position. Many people, when they think about finger locks, they have the misperception that it's a matter of grabbing the finger and just twisting it around and pulling it back, and it really isn't. There's a technique to this, there's a science to this. We want to take some time to try to explain really how to get the most out of these locks. First of all, if you're going to grab a finger, okay, any finger, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to use what we call a vertical finger lock to demonstrate these techniques to get us started. But really, a vertical finger lock just means the finger lock is taking place on a vertical plane. It doesn't matter if I use the index finger or these two fingers, or I could even at some point get a thumb. But the concepts on all these locks are still going to be the same as we go forward. What I want to talk about first of all is hand position. When you grab a hold, or when you contact with somebody's finger, you don't want to just grab the finger this way. You want to hold on this way. Okay, and there's a lot of reasons for that. What you want to do is I want you to think of it this way. Think of laying the finger in the palm of your hand. Just lay it in the palm of your hand this way. Well, you're going to find a pattern going through this DVD of taking away space. That's what we're trying to do. In this case, we don't want to grab it this way where there's going to be a lot of space under here. What we want to do is lay it in the palm of your hand gently this way, all right, to take the space away. When you lay the finger in your palm, the next step is going to be to very gently take your bottom fingers and curl it around the bottom this way. It's not a matter of grabbing on very, very tight. We're not trying to grab onto all our might and not let this person have any type of reaction. What we're trying to do is lay the finger in your palm, gently curl your fingers around the bottom of the finger this way. Keep it very, very relaxed. Relaxation is the key to finger locking techniques, and I'll give you an explanation of how that can work. If I grab onto his finger very, very hard this way, all right, and I think about using strength and muscle instead of principles and applications, what happens is it limits my own effectiveness. It limits my range of motion. If I grab onto a finger, in fact, I use it as an illustration of making a fist. Okay, if I make a fist, and I'm going to do those wrist exercises that we did in the very beginning of the DVD, really my range of motion goes from about here to here. I have about a 90-degree range of motion as far as this is concerned, all right? When we're doing finger locking techniques, you're going to understand in a couple of minutes how important it is to have a proper range of motion. If I make a fist, in other words, I'm grabbing something very, very tight, my range of motion is very, very limited. If I'm very relaxed, and I lay it in the palm of my hand and just curl the fingers over the bottom this way, all right? And again, my hand is in a very, very relaxed position. Using it as a demonstration, my range of motion increases greatly by cutting at the wrist that way. Going back to those wrist exercises in the beginning of the DVD, you can see that my range of motion is going to be much, much more substantial doing this than if I was going to hold on very, very tight and try to twist the finger back that way. Another reason it's important to stay relaxed during finger lock techniques, joint lock techniques, or any martial arts technique is the principle of reciprocity. What reciprocity basically means is if I give him something very, very strong to react to and very resistant to react to, he's going to react in kind. If I grab on very, very tightly, he's going to resist. Resistance breeds resistance. If I were to grab this finger in a very strong way and try to do a finger lock, and I'm very, very tight, he's going to resist it. It becomes strength against strength. Common sense dictates that a smaller person does not typically attack a larger person, so that really doesn't fall into play. If I'm attacked by someone larger than me, I can't rely on my strength in order to facilitate and do an efficient and effective technique. I have to rely on principles, applications, and the proper technique. Once we've established some of the basic fundamentals of finger locking, hand position, relaxation, sensitivity, what we're going to do is we want to demonstrate just a basic vertical finger lock. We'll demonstrate the lock just to give you a perspective on how this lock looks and how it's going to work, and then we'll start getting into some more of the details on how to really make this lock the most efficient and effective. Some of the basic principles of finger locking will be this. First of all, once you get your relaxed hand position and you have your palming correct and you just gently curl your hand around, it's a matter of two-way action. Two-way action means in every joint locking technique, especially finger locks, there's always a pull and a push action going on. It's not a matter of grabbing onto a finger and pressing it downward or pushing it backward or pulling it back to you. It's a very small push and pull action. The best way to demonstrate that particular principle is through what we call fulcrum lever. All right? When you look at someone's finger, all right, or any joint locking technique actually, we're going to use basic rules. Basic rules are the lowest part to the joint is the fulcrum area. This part is going to be a lever. It's just like if I was using a long pole to try to lift a refrigerator or lift something heavy, where I have a fulcrum and a lever, I'm trying to use that to get more effectiveness out of it. What I'm going to do is, after I gain my hand position and gently curl my hand around, staying very relaxed, I'm going to cut back at the fulcrum and press forward at the lever. The basic action is going to be this. This is going to end up going this way. This is going to end up going that way. There's your two-way action. It's going to be a pull and a push. Demonstrated looks this way. You pull back at the fulcrum, press forward at the lever. Use your wrist extension exercises we did in the beginning. All right. Now, every joint locking technique works on those same principles, applying fulcrum and then lever. To give you an example, though, of what you can do wrong, all right, the specific order I say that in is fulcrum, lever. If I do fulcrum, lever, what that does is it takes the space out of the joint for me. All right. Fulcrum lever has this effect on your opponent. If I do that backwards, if I get in the habit of thinking I have to grab that finger and twist it backwards, but not really focusing on that fulcrum first, but more trying to bend the finger, the reaction you're going to have is going to be completely different. If I do the lever first and then the fulcrum, watch the difference. What that allows to do is it allows the palm to come upwards, allows the elbow to drop, all right, and does not obviously have the same effect. All right. By applying the fulcrum first, you're actually compressing the joint. You're actually applying a much tighter lock, and you're taking the space away. The theme you're going to start seeing through this particular DVD is taking away space. In the very beginning, when we talked about the basic fundamentals about using the palm takes away the space between my hand and his finger. If I were to grab this way, there's a lot of space. Space creates opportunity for me to make a mistake and for him to kind of do a little wiggle out, and we don't want that to happen. By using the palm, it takes the space away between me and my opponent. By cutting at the fulcrum and pressing at the lever, it takes the space out of the joint itself. So this will take the space between me and my opponent as far as contact. This will take the space out of the joint itself. I will cut back on the fulcrum, press on the lever, takes all the space away in the joint, makes it much more efficient, much more effective. By taking away the space in the joint, what that really refers to is taking the slack out of the motion. Take the slack out of the joint, take the range of motion away from that particular knuckle, it makes it tighter, more efficient. While there are a lot of principles at work when applying finger locks, the three keys are really this: fulcrum, lever, wrist extension. We've done all those previously. Take away the space, fulcrum, lever, wrist extension. Another important principle to finger locking is keeping your locks low and centered. When I have my initial contact and I activate my fulcrum and my lever, take away that space, there's still an awful lot of play going on here. Even though the joint tends to be a little tighter, he can move his elbow, he can move his shoulder. What I need to do is take that lock and drop it low and center line. That way I can lock up the entire body. What happens is by doing this is I take the space away from the finger, I bring the elbow and the shoulder into this as well, and now it's much more efficient and effective. Up here, way too much play going on. He might be able to lift that elbow, might be able to squirm out, all that kind of thing. When I keep my lock low and center, it takes out all that motion and all that space in his body, makes the joint more efficient, more effective. Once you've established your initial contact, once you've taken away the slack in the joint, once you've dropped it low and center, this is where you're going to apply your fulcrum, lever, wrist extension backwards towards your opponent's center line. I don't want to take my techniques and pull him back this way. Right? That gives him way, way too much opportunity to grab a leg, to walk along with me, to too much space, too much play going on. What I want to do is I want to take this technique low and center, apply my fulcrum, lever, wrist extension, and forward motion. I've taken away the space in the joint, taken away the space in the movement. Now I'm going to take away as much space as I can between myself and my opponent. What I want to do is I want to step in with my lead foot. I want to apply my fulcrum, lever, wrist extension right back towards the center line. Another view of the center line principle is I go from my center line directly through the lock back into his center line. So as I maintain my body position, my hand is going to be in line from my center line through the finger lock itself, directly back into my opponent's center line. I apply my motion. Two key points I want to make when we're dealing with finger lock techniques. First of all, when we're talking about hand position. Hand position, we've already talked about, is palming this out. All right? You do not want to get in the habit of either one, grabbing, for many reasons that we've already talked about, or two, palming it too low. You don't want to get to the point where when you close your hand on the fulcrum, your opponent's fingertip is sticking out the top. Reason being is because I could have all my principles and applications in place, but if you curls the top of that finger over, it is going to be impossible for me to get to a finger lock. Now it's a matter of strength versus strength. So whenever you palm, make sure you palm right along the top of that finger this way. That way it applies your compression and applies everything else that'll work for you. You do not want to get too low in the finger. Another key point I want to talk about is control. The whole key of finger locking, and in my aspect, joint locking in general, is control. We've talked about joint compression, we've talked about hyperextension, we've talked about pain compliance, but I've never once used the word break. You know, my intent is not to ever break someone's finger. Right? If I get in there and I break somebody's finger, I've lost my degree of control. I can't control someone if his finger's flopping around like a piece of old spaghetti. I need to have that tension in there. I don't want to have to break this and then start all over. By maintaining that consistency, maintaining that resistance in that joint, that's what gives you the control. It's not about breaking. Right? It's not about hurting someone. It's about controlling someone as much as you can and applying as least amount of harm as possible. So you never want to make an effort to break any of these joints or break any of these fingers. It's all about control. It's not about punishment. Let's look at the finger pointing in the face in a little more detail. As he points my finger in my face, it's very, very important not to put my hands up this way. A A lot of people go, hey, whoa, back. The problem with that is if my hands are up here, any motion I have to make to get to this finger or get to any type of a lock is very visible, it's very wide, a lot of motion going on. If I'm from here and I just start doing this, he's going to see this coming a mile away and pull away. Or even if I get my hand down, he's going to have time to react. What it is I put my hands up here. They're underneath his arm. If you see that his arm is in his way, you can't see this hand. This is the first hand that moves on the outside here. What I do is I come up, I touch, and I scissor these two together. Right? And the scissoring effect, if I were just going to try to reach and grab this finger, if I was just going to try to grab it very quickly, because I have to react quickly in a self-defense situation, I may have this happen to me. Right? There's no base behind that. If I use this hand as a base and I come here and I press this here, I can now scissor this in between and give me something to react to. I can grab onto it very easily. Scissoring is a very important concept. Reach up, touch, scissor, take the finger. Once I get it to this point, all the principles we've already talked about are going to apply. I palm it, I cut across the fulcrum, I drop it low and center, fulcrum, lever, wrist extension, stepping forward. So, once I establish the fact I'm going to go from what he called a blind spot, he can't see my hands coming up, I reach up and touch, press this into this hand, palm it. Again, stay very, very relaxed. If I were to grab this finger very tight and try to do a finger lock, he's going to respond to my strength with his strength, and we're going to have this kind of a situation going on here. All right? What I need to do is stay completely relaxed, palm it, cut it to fulcrum, drop it low, fulcrum, lever, wrist extension. Let's look at using a finger lock against a chest push in a little more detail. First of all, before we even get to the lock, let's look at body position for a second. As he steps in and pushes, if I were to stay completely straight, and he was going to push me backwards, that would knock my center line right backwards. All right. What happens? The problem with that is, as he pushes, my body reels back, my feet stay in place, I'm off balance. Okay. You don't want to find yourself in this position. But using rotational momentum and non-opposition of force, there's two key principles going on here. As he touches, I turn my body. Okay. As he makes contact, right, rather than keep it here, I'm going to rotate my body about a 45 degree and let that energy pass straight through. As he steps in and presses, okay, as I rotate my body, I take this hand and I touch it on this first knuckle. As I rotate, when that passes by, it feeds into the palm of my hand. So as I step in, touch, turn, falls right into that palm position we talked about in the first part of the DVD. Touch, turn, lock. Now, adding the concepts of scissoring this particular technique, as he pushes, okay, I touch. As I turn, I use my arm to press against his forearm. If I were just going to try to grab this finger lock, this could happen. Right? There's too much play going on. As I touch and step in, using my arm to scissor this into place for me, sets up the finger lock for me. Right now it's wedged basically between my arm and my hand. And I can just very easily snatch the fingers. Again, if there's too much space or too much play, it's going to be very difficult to get an efficient lock. Without that scissoring effect again, touch, turn, this could happen. I want to avoid that. What I do is I use scissoring. Touch, turn, press against the arm, press against the side knuckle of the hand, gets locked into place. I simply take the finger, apply all the principles we've already talked about, have a nice effective finger lock takedown. This particular entry of body rotation and non-opposition force can be used for other locks and techniques as well. So if it's not finger locks you're working on, but there's other techniques you do within your particular system, this may prove valuable for you. As he comes in, I can turn with my hand coming over the top, go into a wrist lock maneuver as well. So as he pushes, I would turn my body, hook the hand, bring it back in for the wrist. Another variation would be I may come here, turn my body, roll into an arm bar. So as he comes in and pushes, turn, roll into an arm bar. So there's a couple variations of that particular body turn technique that you can really use to your advantage. Let's take a closer look at using a finger lock against a two-hand choke from the front. As Paul comes up and chokes, the last thing I want to do is try to fight this. Again, going back to reciprocation, I don't want to try to use muscle against muscle, strength against strength. There's many self-defense classes and movies and that type of thing where I see people do the choke, and their classic defense is to try to break this off. Okay? He's in such a strong position right now that this is not a practical effect. One of the things that we really focus on is shooting for the smallest target, focusing on the smallest point. All right? As he comes up and chokes, all right, I'm going to do, my initial action is to maintain contact. What I want to do is take this hand and just lay it on top of his hand. Don't grab. If I grab, again, it goes back to reciprocation. If I grab real tight and start struggling, he's going to muscle me out. It becomes strength against strength. That being the case, all you want to do is just touch gently. It's not a matter of control, it's a matter of contact. My second hand, I'm going to take my middle finger and go for that sternal notch. Everyone has one of these. Some schools use this as a very effective self-defense technique. It's that little gully right above where your collarbone meets in the middle. If you take your middle finger and press on that, that's going to cause a gag reflex. By just pressing it, that's going to be the effect it's going to have. All right. So what I'm going to do is simply touch this hand. You know, the point that I like to use as a target area is I take my palm, I put it right on his first knuckle. That's a great place to be. It gives me access to the entire hand. When I use my middle finger to press against that sternal notch, his natural reaction, his natural self-preservation when you attack somebody's windpipe or breath is to pull back. Right? Again, I'm not trying to use this to push him away. I could essentially do this and get him off me, and the situation is resolved. What I want to do is control the situation. If I do this and press him off me, I'm not in control. Now he can come back and attack me again. So what I'm going to do is touch, press, and develop what I call workable space. Now I have something I can work with. I've touched the hand. Again, if you look, I'm actually scissoring it with my shoulders. All right? I can very simply just take the finger, drop it low, apply my fulcrum lever wrist extension. I have my finger lock. One more time. Touch, poke, turn, lock. One thing you have to be conscious of when you're doing any technique is that other hand. As he comes up and does the choke, we'll use this as an example. I touch, I press, I'm in a beautiful position for a finger lock. What I have to be aware of is that other hand coming up. At any given time, he may decide to throw that punch, and now no amount of locking is going to help. What I'm going to do is I'm going to touch, turn, and again, immediately go into my locking technique. If we talk about all the concepts and principles that we've discussed already, I do my fulcrum lever activation, I put the lock low and center, I step forward, apply my wrist extension. This is going to be completely taken out of the picture. So as I come in, here, from here, drop right into your locking technique, the punch is going to go away. Another important aspect of this particular distraction technique of pressing on the sternal notch would be if he were to choke, and the concept or the idea would be for him to punch me, all right? By pressing this notch, what it does is it just takes the wind right out of this particular attack, all right? We'll just do it this way. If I'm here and that hand comes up and he feels this, the punch just completely disappears. So as he comes up to punch, again, the windpipe is going to vastly outweigh any other instincts that particular attacker may have. Survival comes first. When you attack someone's windpipe, when you attack someone's eyes, their survival instinct is going to take over. So the other techniques are not going to be effective. Now let's talk about the bear hug defense using a finger lock. Now there are many, many different types of bear hugs, front, back, over the arms, under the arms. We're just going to use one as an example just to kind of get the concept across. He comes up from behind, catches me under the arms. Again, naturally, as in any martial arts technique, what I need to do is drop my weight. As I drop my weight, I put my hands right on the side of his hand here this way. The target area I'm looking for my palm is right on the side of that first knuckle on his index finger. All right? Too many times I see people try to peel this off and try to work this. You can't work against strength. Again, you have to work against principle. If I take my palm and put it right against the side of that first knuckle and press straight down, it's not a matter of trying to pull it away. It's a matter of pushing straight down. The natural anatomy of the hand will allow that to open. All right? So going back to it, I'm going to secure with this one hand so he doesn't go anywhere. Drop my weight. My palm is going to go on the side knuckle, press straight down towards the ground. All right? What that does is cause that hand to open up. If you look at my position now, a finger lock is a very natural and very effective technique. All I need to do is assume my hand position, turn, and back into the finger lock. As he grabs, drop your weight. This hand's going to pin to give yourself something to brace on. This palm is going to press against the side index knuckle, press straight down. That causes it to open up. From here, I'm simply going to secure the finger, turn, apply my principles. Up to this point, we've been discussing and primarily using the vertical finger lock. Let's take a second and look at some variations of some finger locks and some different types to give you some other alternatives. Just for the sake of demonstration, we'll do this off a chest push. As Paul pushes, I'm going to do the technique that we've done previously, just again to get into that finger lock position. I'm going to touch the knuckle, scissor, turn, and get into finger lock position. At this point, of course, I can step and I can go into my finger lock takedown. But let's assume this person has a little bit of training, a little bit of sensitivity, maybe a little savvy. And instead of going into a finger lock, what I'm going to do is, as I apply it, he tends to drop his elbow to get underneath this way. Again, it's not a matter of strength against strength. If I start pressing and trying to put this down, the stronger person is going to win. We're going to give you a variation on that to help you get through that situation. Touch, turn, go for the lock. As the elbow starts to drop, whenever you find that kind of resistance, you don't want to just suddenly start to panic. What I'm going to do is simply change the direction of the lock. I'm going to go from a vertical finger lock to what we call an inverted finger lock. What you do is you take your hand, and if you go back to those wrist exercises we were doing in the beginning of the video, we do those inside wrist twists. I started with my palm this way, my thumb up, and I ended up turning it the other way. This is the exercise that's going to allow you to flow into this particular lock. As he pushes, I touch, turn, lock, and now I'm going to invert and turn it this way. It's an upside down vertical finger lock is what it is. What I like to do is take this and place it right against my body. Placing it against your body this way, or place it against the floor or anything else, touches on the principle of creating a base. When your locks are out here floating around, even though you're taking up a lot of space in the joint, taking up a lot of space in the movement, taking all that away, when I come here, I can create a base. Creating a base means this. We've already talked about the fulcrum point on a particular hand or on a particular lock. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take that fulcrum point and press it and plant it right against my base. In this case, I'm using my midsection. It's not a matter of creating a base this way, where I just press it down, press the palm. I need to activate the fulcrum against the base. So when I have the finger this way, I'm going to press the fulcrum down into the base. Go back to your basic principles. Fulcrum, lever, wrist extension. Fulcrum, lever, wrist extension. From this inverted finger lock position, creating a base takes up a lot more space, all right? Even more so than we have already. When I apply pressure against the fulcrum, okay, and compress with the lever, it can be a very painful, finger lock. All right. Again, the interesting thing is, and it's going to be difficult, I think, in really picking up some of the subtleties on video, but it's a matter of just pressing against the fulcrum, pressing against the lever. Now, when you're dealing with the inverted finger lock, again, creating a base, one of the questions that will inevitably come up is that other hand. Right? I'm only locking one side of his body. He has this other hand. Typically, people may think that you're going to lock this side of the body, this other hand's going to come, and you're going to get a punch right in the face. All right? There's a unique principle involved in joint locking called cross-extension paralysis. In essence, what it means is if I effectively control one side of the body using pain compliance and joint locking techniques, it nullifies the other side of the body. It works this way. I apply an inverted finger lock. I'm going to apply fulcrum, lever, wrist extension by creating a base, again, taking out the space. As that hand comes up to punch, what I'm going to do is apply this particular technique. Right? Hand comes up to punch, apply. Hand comes up to punch. I've essentially nullified the left side of his body by applying a lock on his right hand. Another consideration is I've got this locked right in. As his body rotates towards me, it actually takes away more space in the lock and actually makes it even tighter and more efficient. So as he rotates his body towards me, it helps me with my particular lock. That being said as well, I may choose to decide to turn towards him. To make the lock more efficient and effective. A way to get into this inverted finger lock really would be any time that you can get into a vertical finger lock, be it a push, be it a shove, be a finger point, anything that we've already talked about. All I'm going to do is get into my finger lock position, simply invert my palm upwards, and apply it this way. Again, this will work this way as well. I may choose to lay my forearm on top of his arm to create a base that way, which can be very, very painful. I may choose to create a base against my body this way. All right, but in essence, all you're going to do is you're going to take a regular vertical finger lock, invert it upward, apply your technique. Another variation on a finger lock would be what we call the reverse finger lock. Again, for demonstration purposes, we'll do it off a chest push. He comes in, I go through the motions we've talked about previously, where I get into my vertical finger lock. One of the basic applications of this is if that hand decides to come, okay, what I can do is I can take this and reverse the direction so his palm is facing outward. All right? I come here. That starts to come. I reverse the direction of the finger lock. His palm is facing outward. That causes that shoulder to rock backwards, and that punch, in essence, disappears. One more time. Touch, turn, lock. As that punch starts to come, reverse it out, secures that shoulder, causes that body to turn the other direction. This is also a great come-along for law enforcement techniques, security personnel, that type of a thing, because then at any given time, if I choose to, I can invert back into my downward finger lock, put this gentleman down on the ground. One more variation on a finger lock would be the reverse two-finger lock. We already demonstrated on a number of applications against the chest push that I'm turning this way. When I turn that way, it creates that space. My palm falls right into that finger, and I can do a very easy finger lock. I turn this way, I have my finger lock position. Right? But what happens if I turn the wrong way is really the case. What happens if he pushes me very hard and my body rotates back in this direction? Or for some reason, I just turn the wrong way. Instead of turning to my right, I turn to my left. We need to have an alternative for that, and she'll explain to you how it works. As he presses, and as I do my first knuckle, I'm going to turn in this direction, which again opens up that space. I then hook these two fingers to bring them back into a finger lock position. Touch, turn, hook these two fingers out, bring them back into finger lock position. Now we're going to need to change positions for you to get a good effective view of this. I'm going to touch, turn in the other direction, hook these two fingers back in this position here. You'll see my hands backwards compared to the other finger locks. None of the principles are going to change. Even though my hand's in a different position, the principles still remain consistent. Fulcrum, which is going to be here. Lever, which is going to be the finger. Wrist extension. 1, 2, 3. Now, one of the other principles we talked about was scissoring, and again, scissoring applies to this lock as well. As he pushes and I touch and turn, I don't just try to grab these fingers. I don't just do this, because I could very easily miss. What I'm actually doing is touching and turning, but as I turn, I hook my fingers this way, and I'm pressing with my forearm, in essence, getting it stuck in the middle. Again, if I give too much play, this will happen. If I touch, turn, you can see my forearm remains in contact with the inside of his forearm. I hook these fingers, bring it back in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to touch the back of those knuckles again. Turn my body. As I turn my body, I touch with my forearm. And I use this hand to pull back on those fingers. So in essence, again, that hand is wedged in between my forearm and those fingers. I reverse it, bring it back to the front. Goes right back to the same principles. Fulcrum, lever, wrist extension. Now that we talked about some different finger locks, let's talk about what you do once you get them in the finger locks. All right. Obviously, the best case scenario for a self-defense situation or a law enforcement situation is to have the person down on the ground in total control. All right. A couple options would be this. From a vertical finger lock, all right, again, all the principles remain the same. I cut back at my fulcrum, I extend to my lever, I use my wrist extension, and I use my forward motion, right, to apply this lock. From here, what I'd like to do is simply take this lock position and drop it straight to the ground. Now, we had talked about applying a base against my midsection. Now I can apply that base against the ground. Okay? Again, the base is not designed by putting the palm against the ground. The base is actually utilized by putting the fulcrum against the ground. Right? So all the pressure goes against the finger joints. As I apply fulcrum, lever, wrist extension, it's very painful. I can control my opponent very easily. So to do an effective finger lock pin, you want to have your opponent down on the ground. As I apply it, drop it, and press. It puts me in a position of control. Another concept of what we're doing with finger locks, wrist locks, really anything, is the palm theory. Basically, the palm theory means that the body's going to go whichever direction the palm happens to be facing. So when we've done a couple of different variations of finger locks, you've probably seen it, but I wanted to bring it to your attention. If I'm doing a vertical finger lock, since the palm is facing downward, as I apply my technique, his body will go downward. When I do an inverted finger lock, the palm is facing upward, so he's going to want to come up on his toes. His body's going to come upward this way. One more example is if I do a reverse finger lock, his palm is now facing outward, so as I apply the lock, his body has a tendency to go in that direction. How this can come into play is to give you superior control over someone when you're doing finger locks. You get into a finger lock technique, you can pretty much control this opponent any way, any shape, any direction you really want to. We've already given you some examples. I'm in a finger lock position, that punch starts to come. What I want to do is turn his body away. Right? If I want to drop him to the ground, I apply a downward finger lock this way. If I want to keep him on his feet yet maintain control, I can do an inverted finger lock this way. Again, it doesn't really matter what direction you go. And it doesn't really matter how you decide to pin. We pin it to the ground. I may decide to pin it to my leg. I may decide to pin it to my midsection, pin it to my arm. There's a lot of different opportunities and variables you have on that. So again, the palm theory dictates whatever direction the palm is facing, that's the direction your opponent's going to go. To touch base again on two of the other principles we were talking about, relaxation is critical for finger locking, really any type of locking in martial arts technique. Because by being relaxed and being sensitive to his motion, that helps me work with that reciprocal energy. Again, if I was very, very tight, very, very strong, it would be very difficult for me to be sensitive to determine what action he was going to take. If I decided to take a nice hard grip on this, just grab the finger very, very tightly, all right? I'll go ahead and pull down. Go ahead. And one more time. All right? It's strength against strength, all right? And if I apply the principles we've talked about, it gives me relaxation and sensitivity. I palm it very gently. I curl across the fulcrum. I press against the lever. Pull, pull. Pull. Straight back. Again, by me maintaining a very relaxed, sensitive grip, relaxed, sensitive touch, it gives me the sensitivity to determine what his next action is going to be. So when we're talking about in regards to palm control, if I'm this way being very relaxed, I feel him start to wiggle or squirm in a different direction, I can change. If he decides to drop that elbow, I can feel that at this point, and I can change yet again. So being relaxed is critical to having the sensitivity. So in essence, palm control means I can dictate whatever direction my opponent's going to move in. At the same time, the sensitivity from that allows his motion to lead him into any particular lock that's most efficient and effective at that particular movement. Now that you're starting to get an understanding of, and we've taken the time to discuss some of the principles and fundamentals of finger locking, let's talk about some of the more advanced principles of finger locking. Again, if you've done everything we've talked about in this DVD up this far, you should have very effective, very efficient finger locks for your martial arts curriculum or your self-defense techniques. Let's talk about a couple of things that really kick finger locks to the next level. One of the first things I want to talk about is what I call fulcrum activation. As we've already discussed, what you really want to do is you want to take the slack out of that particular joint. You want to drop it low and center, and you want to do fulcrum, lever, wrist extension action as you step forward. What fulcrum activation does, it's the initial motion upon the first contact with that particular hand or that joint. In other words, when I get to here, rather than just taking the slack away, what I want to do is make a conscious effort to activate that fulcrum. So what I'm going to do is when I get my palm position, I'm literally going to cut right back with the fulcrum. Go back to those wrist extension exercises in the beginning, and it's that kind of motion here. My initial action is going to be this. Again, you cut the fulcrum first, the lever second. Let me show you what I mean. Now, on the DVD, that particular motion probably doesn't look like much, but let me show you what the difference is going to be. If I just take out a little bit of slack, okay, and I drop the lock low and center, this is Paul's body reaction. Now I can do my fulcrum, lever, wrist extension and follow through with those motions. Again, I just take it low and center, fulcrum, lever, wrist extension. When I do my initial fulcrum activation and make a conscious effort to cut back on that fulcrum in that very small wrist extension motion, right? Again, this motion may be subtle, but now when I lower the lock, I've taken up all the slack that there could possibly be. Now when I lower that lock and step in, this is Paul's initial body reaction. I haven't done my fulcrum lever wrist extension yet. If you look at just taking up the slack and dropping the lock low and center, he's still basically facing me. There's a lot of wasted time there, a lot of wasted opportunity. If I do my initial fulcrum activation, just by doing that motion right there, as I drop, his body is much more reactive. In essence, what you're doing by locking up that initial fulcrum activation is taking into play as you step in, locking the wrist, locking the elbow, locking the shoulder, locking the spine down into the hips. So you can see his entire body is going to react to this. Initial fulcrum activation, low and center, fulcrum, lever, wrist extension. That subtle motion right at the very beginning makes your finger locks much, much more effective and much more efficient. I need to stress when we're talking about fulcrum activation that it's all in the name. It is fulcrum activation. In other words, if I do lever first, in other words, if it looks like I'm just pushing back on that finger, this is going to be a reaction from Paul. What I need to do is take the space out in the fulcrum first and react it that way. In other words, take up that space. If you look at it very, very distinctly, I'm actually not driving forward with the lever. I'm actually pulling back with the fulcrum. The hand position looks this way, but it's not a matter of pushing forward with the lever. It's a matter of taking the fulcrum and pulling it back to my center line. That takes out the space. As I drop it, you can see what's happening. Much, much more body control, much more body reaction. Another principle or concept that fulcrum activation and this forward pressure and everything we've talked about so far applies is called grounding. What grounding means is I'm actually manipulating his body and his joint alignment in such a way that his feet are technically pinned to the floor. He's grounded to the floor. He really can't do much. In other words, if I just do a basic motion, like I see many, many locks that people do in different systems and styles, where they get to this point here and then the lock is applied. The problem with that is an awful lot of wasted motion and wasted space. If I go to here, I haven't had what I call structural disruption on him. I haven't affected his body per se. All I've done is lock up his fingers or his joints or his wrists or whatever the case may be, whatever technique you may happen to be doing. And when I do this, all right, Paul, go ahead and hit me with the other hand. Boom. Go ahead and kick me with the, all right, he's still in balance. By doing this initial fulcrum activation, dropping it low, stepping in, I have yet to do the actual technique. This is just what I call my set spot, my set position. I'm ready to go from here. Paul, go ahead and hit me with the other hand. Very difficult for that to come around. Paul, go ahead and lift that foot up and kick me. In essence, he's grounded to the floor. So it's very important as you follow through with these techniques, activate your fulcrum, take away as much space as you can. Make a conscious effort to cut back at that fulcrum. Drop it low and center. All right, applying backwards pressure to ground him to the floor. Now when I do fulcrum, lever, wrist extension, it's a very subtle motion because everything else has already been aligned for me. Another key principle to joint locking, and specifically to this DVD on finger locking, is spinal alignment. It's very important, in order to control the structure of your opponent, to align the lock itself with the direction of his spine. In other words, if he was facing me off the little side a little bit, and I was trying to go towards what people conceivably consider the center line, and the center line is the line going right down the dead center of the body from the front, the alignment of that particular lock would be just off center between myself and my opponent. So as I lock into him, it has this effect. Notice how that shoulder tends to drop, for him to compensate. What I really want to focus on is not center line. What I want to focus on is the spine, my opponent's spine. His spine right now, standing at this slight angle, is actually going to be off to the side, about in line with the chest. His center line would be over here if I looked at it from the front. What I'm going to do is direct it towards his spine. Again, going towards center line from this area, you can see him start to compensate and drop that shoulder. If I go directly back into the spine, that energy goes right down into the hips and plants him to the ground. So when you do your locks, whether it be finger lock, wrist lock, whatever the case may be, align the locks with your opponent's spine, not necessarily your opponent's center line. A lot of the principles and concepts we've talked about so far in this DVD come directly from the Book of Martial Power by Mr. Steve Pearlman. One of the principles that he talks about a lot is the principle of spiraling. If I'm doing a finger lock and I'm going straight into that person, that's very uncomfortable, and it's a great technique. If I can add extra planes to that attack, extra angles, extra motion, the body really has a very, very difficult time with that. In other words, there might be some resistance from one plane to attack. If I add a second plane, it's much, much more effective. Let me give you an example of spiraling as you can use it for a finger lock. Let's assume we're doing a basic vertical finger lock. Typically what we talked about so far is everything that goes into play. Activate the fulcrum, drop it low and center, fulcrum lever wrist extension, and lock. And then as we just talked about in the last sequence we did, we take that and we direct it back towards the opponent's spine in order to lock up his structure. All right? What you can do is add spiraling to that. It's a small motion that basically states that instead of going directly back to the spine, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to take this and off-center it ever so slightly to cross that line and then come back in again and drop it in. You'll notice a huge difference in Paul's reaction. If I go directly back in the spine and everything we've done so far is extremely effective, fulcrum activation, low and center, fulcrum lever wrist extension, forward motion, very effective. If I add that slight little offset motion of spiraling involved, it's even more effective. Now, picking up the subtleties of that particular motion on DVD may be a little difficult, but in essence what we're doing, to give you an exaggerated view, is instead of going straight back to that particular spine, we're actually coming off to the side, coming forward, bringing you back in. Not in that large motion, mind you, very, very subtle, in order to tighten up the lock and make it more efficient, more effective. Another principle talked about in the Book of Martial Power is vibrational force, or as we referred to it previously, reciprocal energy. It has a lot to do with how a person is going to react or how someone's going to react to the energy that's giving them. Briefly, what we talked about is if I hold on very, very strong, very, very tight, he's going to react in a very, very strong, tight way, and it becomes muscle against muscle. Whereas if I'm very relaxed, he's going to react in a very relaxed manner. He has nothing to respond to in this. You can very easily do your palm control. You can do your transitions in your other locks. You're very relaxed because there's nothing for him to really respond to. To play vibration into this, if I can apply a finger lock and do everything we've done so far that we've talked about, right up through the advanced principles, fulcrum activation, low and center, going off center line, that spiraling effect we just talked about, right? Lever fulcrum wrist extension. Right? Vibration would be, the easiest way for me to explain this is applying the lock, slightly let out some of the pressure, applying the lock again. So it's almost like a stutter effect. So I can do this. 1, I've slightly relaxed, 2. 1, slight relaxation in my fulcrum, 2. All right. If you do that a little quicker, it looks like this. Right? You can't see the subtleties of DVD. It's a matter of applying the pressure, a slight relaxation, and reapplying that pressure again in almost a stutter step kind of a way. Again, the concept is naturally his body's going to react to that first pressure that he's going to feel. When I give a slight reaction, a slight relaxation, there's a slight relaxation in his body, and I reapply that lock. It becomes that much more efficient. You don't want to keep that constant pressure on these locks. A lot of law enforcement people will tell you that when you pin someone to the ground and you're trying to control them, by keeping that constant pressure, it doesn't take long before someone's body to compensate for that. What this does is keeps the body thinking, keeps the body moving, keeps the techniques fresh, and make it basically impossible for them to react. As we mentioned earlier when we talked about spiraling and going off that spinal line, the body does not like to be attacked from multiple directions at the same time. When we did that finger lock and we decided to take it slightly off that spinal line, it was a much more efficient reaction. It works the same way when you're dealing with different planes and different types of techniques. In other words, different angles or axes. In the explanation of a finger lock, so far we've always talked about fulcrum lever and all the other principles involved as well. But when we do fulcrum lever, in essence, it's straight back. It's one plane of attack, all right? Or basically two concepts: pulling against the fulcrum, pressing against the lever. Let's add a couple more things to that to make it even more efficient. What I can do is I can now take this finger and do fulcrum lever. I can now take this and attack at a different axis. Again, there's no space in here, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and turn that finger ever so slightly off at an angle this way. Now I have a third axis. So we've got 1, 2, 3. You notice Paul tapped on that one there. That's a little uncomfortable. 1, 2, 3. All right. In essence, what you're doing is even taking out more space out of that joint and making it more efficient. That's 3 axes. 1, 2, 3. As I apply the finger lock now, I'm attacking from 3 different directions, not just the 2. Continuing with that particular explanation, I can do it against basing a pin against my chest. We've talked about that previously. I can do 1, 2, fulcrum lever. 3 would be angling off, coming up from underneath. Basically what I'm doing is taking the finger after I tighten it up and coming down this way. 1, 2, 3. And the 4th would be a compression, which is a downward angle, which is 4. Right? So what I'm doing is I'm coming in 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. By attacking the joint from 4 separate directions, it actually compresses that joint and makes it even more effective. What may be another example, and I'll use a different type of a lock just to give you a more visual effect on this. If I did this against what we call a bent elbow wrist lock, this way. If we follow the principles which are consistent through all joint locking of fulcrum level wrist extension, fulcrum, lever, wrist extension. Fulcrum, which is where my hand is, lever, which is this one, and then wrist extension. It's a very effective lock. It beats trying to do a lot of this action. Let's add those 2 axes and see what happens. Fulcrum, lever, off axis, compression. Right? It makes a lot much more tighter. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now when I do this all together with my wrist extension, it's a very efficient, very effective technique. Very painful. Be very careful when you start doing this. To add a little more explanation as far as the compression. Fulcrum, lever, off axis. What your compression is actually doing is, since you're pushing from the top of the joint, you're actually pressing that joint back down into its own axis, right back into its own knuckle. So I'm taking that finger and pressing it down into that knuckle. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and compressing it down that way. You've taken up so much space out of that joint that when you add your wrist extension and your forward pressure, it's an incredibly effective technique and very painful. Once you start getting an understanding of these extra axes or extra planes of attack when you're attacking the joint, it doesn't necessarily have to be based out against your body or against the floor or anything else. You can do your palm. You can do your basic vertical finger lock. You can do fulcrum, lever, off angle. Again, it's a very subtle move. I'm not trying to move this whole hand. I'm just changing the position of the joint. And now the compression goes straight down. Once you become conscious of these principles, this all gets encompassed with the basic wrist extension motion that you're doing. I'm doing fulcrum, lever, off angle. My wrist extension, if you watch how my wrist goes, actually causes, now that I'm conscious of this particular principle, that joint to compress downward. So it's not just bending it back, it's bending it down into the fulcrum and tightening it right up. And you see by Paul's reaction, it's a little uncomfortable. So fulcrum, lever, axis, compression. I have yet to do my wrist extension, which I'll leave out here because that would be very uncomfortable. But once you put all these pieces of this puzzle together, The joint locks are so efficient and so effective, and as Paul can probably attest to, very painful. So be very cautious with these. We said early on in the DVD that you can incorporate finger locks into your own style, your own system, or your own method of self-defense. It doesn't matter if you're a kicker, you're a striker, a locker, a trapper, or a thrower. Finger locks can be effective for you. Give you a couple examples. He may have pushed me, I get into my finger lock situation, and maybe I'm a striker. When I turn this out into my reverse finger lock, it opens up so many vital opportunities for me to strike. I can strike against different pressure points. I can take basic strike to the face if I'm not that specific. I can take strikes to the side of the neck, which, as most people know, the carotid artery would be a very easy knockout technique. So I can actually use my finger locks to open up my opportunities for striking and do it that way. One more time. And very easy to open up to whatever particular system, whatever preference I may have. I can use it if I'm a judo player or an aikido player, if I'm a thrower. You may come in, I do a finger lock, I can open it up, step into a throw, or any type of other takedown I want. So the great part about these kind of techniques is they are universal. It doesn't matter what system you study, it doesn't matter what style you prefer. You have an opportunity to use these to enhance your system and enhance your style. I'd like to thank you for watching this DVD on dynamic finger locks. This is the first volume. There will be more volumes to come. I'd like to thank my partner, Mr. Paul Munn, for acting as an uke and taking the punishment and the beating for you to see the concepts of finger locks. I'd like to thank Grandmaster Wally J, who without his input, his direction, and his founding of Small Circle Jiu-Jitsu, most of these techniques and principles really wouldn't have been presented here on video today. And I'd also like to say a special thank you to Grandmaster Leon J, whose teaching and direction to me personally has really helped me become a better martial artist and be able to present these things to you. I would strongly recommend the other DVD programs that have been put in production by Single Step Productions and the Book of Martial Power by Mr. Stephen Perlman. A lot of the principles and concepts that we were discussing here today are in those DVDs and in that book, and this would be a great reference material for you to move forward and become a better martial artist, a better student, and a better instructor. Thank you very much. Here's some things that will be covered in future dynamic finger lock DVDs from Single Step Productions. Transitional locking. Shut down.